Hey class, my name is Julia Larsen, and my case study is titled Failed Attempts in STEM Careers, a reflection of a woman pursuing careers in the STEM field. So from a very early age, I was always interested in science. When I was little, I wanted to be a veterinarian and perform surgeries on animals to save them. I always had a love for animals, science, investigating things, finding out how things work, and just overall being creative. My parents were extremely supportive of my interests and never gave me the feeling that I couldn't be anything that I wanted to be. The whole gender mentality of men being more likely to go into STEM studies was never discussed in my family. So my parents were always very supportive. I always excelled in science classes, and some of my best memories come from these classes. So I remember making yogurt in middle school biology with live cultures and dissecting squids and sharks. I was always very interested in these classes. So I loved learning about scientific processes, history, and how we could use science to improve the world we live in for both people and animals and the environment. So I was interested specifically in infectious diseases. And when I grew up, I wanted to pursue a career researching cures and treatments for different types of diseases. So discussing my educational background, I was a public school student growing up, and I was always an above average student. I was very passionate about school and always did my best. I was always very interested in learning. So while I didn't qualify for gifted classes or advanced courses while I was in primary and secondary schooling, I did pursue dual enrollment. So if you're not familiar with dual enrollment, it's a program that provides funding for students at eligible high schools to enroll in college courses, and they get credit for both college and high school credits. So I did well in these. At the college level, I took many of my basic core courses doing dual enrollment, and so I actually had enough classes to be considered a sophomore when I went to college. I didn't have to take a lot of the core language or history classes that many do. So I graduated high school with a great GPA, scored really high on my SAT and ACT, and was excited about pursuing my degree. So in 2006, I was accepted into the College of Science and Mathematics, or COSAM, at Auburn University, and I studied biomedical sciences. And I chose this major with help from my advisor on courses to take for my particular interest in pursuing research opportunities later on. So it wasn't until I entered post-secondary education that I realized how difficult that women in science really had it, and started to realize that I was a minority in this field. But despite the adversity, I joined several organizations. One of those was Women in Science, or AWIS, and Alpha Epsilon Delta, which was an honors organization for COSAM studies. So I really dove into my biomedical sciences major and just was determined to be successful despite really coming to terms with some of the statistics that I did, just realizing women were not as prevalent in the fields of research. So while I did graduate and obtain my bachelor's degree in biomedical sciences, I struggled to find work that related to my major, and that was what I wanted to do. And it's been 9 years since I graduated with my undergrad, and I really wanted to reflect on women in science and do my case study on the challenges that women in science experience when they look for careers after they graduate. So there is quite a gender gap for science, and speaking globally, women are the minority of the world's researchers, with less than 30% of them being women. Women are less likely to enter into STEM careers and far more likely to leave these careers. And research that I did discussed many different experiences. So things that women experienced more so than men were isolation, hostile male dominant environments, lack of sponsors, ineffective feedback. So a lot of this research that I did came from the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. So in the US, women remain the minority in STEM careers of STEM workers, and very few women earn STEM degrees, and even fewer of these women are women of color. So from the National Center for Education, these statistics are from 2014 to 2015. African American women accounted for 2.9% of STEM degrees, Latinos 3.6%, and Asian women 4.8%. So men are still compensated better than women, even in high-paying STEM jobs, and the STEM field still remains predominantly male. So women are just massively underrepresented in many careers in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics subjects at all levels. So a lot of this research that I did showed that there were fewer females in STEM because of the discrimination against women. And I did some research on the history of female scientists, and while there is some great examples of pioneering women scientists and mathematicians, a lot of these female scientists will never be known because they published anonymously or under male pseudonyms. So speaking about creativity for women in STEM, I did some research and found that David Lubinsky and Camilla Benbow did some research about students who had extremely high test scores. These test scores, they focused on women, and many of these women, despite their high scores, very few, almost none of them went into science, mathematics, or technology majors. Majority of these women chose law or medicine, and while medicine is a portion of STEM, that is not the portion of STEM that I am talking about in my case study. I'm focusing more on research, scientific research. So Lubinsky and Benbow found that high scores on visual thinking tests were far more predictive of successful science careers. And they also found that women did poorly on these when compared to men. Men were succeeded more in the visual thinking tests than women. So when we look at visual thinking tests, I put an example here. So a specific example is this image here, and can these figures or can these objects, if you rotate them, fit perfectly into one another? Oops, sorry. So that's an example of a visual thinking test. So when we look back at Torrance's research, I was trying to figure out, was I creative? Was I a good candidate for STEM work and STEM careers? And I truly did think when you look at Torrance's non-test ID work for creativity, I do consider myself, and I did consider myself, a creative being who would be successful in STEM work. But, despite my feelings of my own creativity, there was a roadblock that, regardless of my creativity, did limit me. So overall research shows that women may be less creative than men and are perceived as such. And creativity, especially in STEM careers, is super important. So while I did earn my degree in biomedical sciences from a reputable university, I struggled for over a year to find a job in the field that I studied and in the specific role that I wanted. So, when I look back, was it my gender? Was it a creativity bias that limited me? It could have been the job market coming out of college in 2010. So did I have the skills needed to enter the workforce? Maybe I was threatened by um, stereotypes of women in science and didn't quite realize it. Growing up, I never had that feeling, but once I entered college, I really started to see the barriers and the limitations that I had. So while there has been some improvements since I graduated, as we bridge the gender gaps for women in the workforce overall, but specifically women in science, there's still a long way for us to go to remove the stigmas that women face when pursuing STEM degrees and careers as well.